is the point of today's special counsel hearing on Capitol Hill? Robert Hur testified about his decision not to charge President Biden for taking classified documents from the White House after he was vice president, and defended the words he used to explain that decision in the report he sent to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. I said President Biden was old and he had a poor memory because that's what I saw when I interviewed him, Hur keeps on saying. Anticipating that testimony, the White House released a transcript of that interview between President Biden and special counsel Hur, hoping to refute those findings. So let's get into it. Find out exactly what that transcript says, also what Democrats and Republicans got out of today's testimony. Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. First off to you, Mike, you read the whole transcript. I tried to get you on the show yesterday. You couldn't come on. You said you were doing something special and secret, and now we know what it is today. You were reading that entire transcript. Does it line up with the way that Robert Hur described the interview?
Well, certainly in the mind of Democrats, no. And that's part of what the reaction was, and what we saw Democrats attempting to do throughout today's hearing was to enter portions of that transcript into the record, to at one point even ask Hur to read in his own words of what he wrote about the president, and then to challenge him based on what was in the transcript itself. The perhaps biggest flashpoint had to do with, of course, Robert Hur assessing that the president was an elderly man with a poor memory, and he cited as evidence to support that assessment the fact that the president could not remember within several years the year in which his son Beau died. Now, the transcript does bear out NBC's reporting, which had been exclusive until we now see the transcript itself, that it was the president himself who raised Beau's death in the context of questions about how he kept certain documents related to the activities of his post-vice presidency in 2017. He did get the date and the day correct, but not the year. Several of his lawyers had to prompt that. But Katie, as somebody, I should say, who has covered President Biden for now 16 years, has probably listened to him more than I would argue most, if not anyone else in this country, let's say. When you read the full transcript, you are seeing a very familiar President Biden, somebody who at times is thinking out loud, somebody who at times is trying to diffuse some of the tension in the room with jokes, somebody who is taking every opportunity when offered to him to tell a story, whether it's about how he entered into public service 50 years ago, or the time he shot a bow and arrow in Mongolia, a trip in 2011, by the way, that I happened to also be traveling with him on. And so it does present a fuller picture of those 5 hours over 2 days that were so pivotal in the special counsel reaching his decision. And it was obviously a big part of what we were discussing and hearing questions about throughout the day of Hur himself.
Let's focus for another moment on the stuff about Beau dying. Can we get a little bit more clarity on what the transcript said? Was he asked specifically by Robert Hur when Beau died, or was he trying to recall events around that time frame?
So it's important to put this in the full context, and reading the full transcript gives us that opportunity. Hur sets up a line of questioning about how Biden was maintaining documents related to various initiatives that he was taking on when he left the White House in 2017. He listed, Hur did, among those activities, the Biden Cancer Initiative, the Penn Biden Center, and the fact that Biden was writing a book. Now, in response to that framing, at the time Biden was renting a home in Virginia, it was Biden himself who, unprompted, did raise, as he tried to reestablish his own timeline of what he was doing in 2017, he says that, well, you have to remember at that time, my son was either deployed or dying. Now, he refers to his deployment, which was in 2010, 2009 into 2010, and his dying, obviously, he was diagnosed with cancer in 2013. So right off the bat, Biden is misstating the timeline that Hur is explicitly asking about. Now, when you speak with White House officials, when you try to get a little fuller context, they point to what Biden then continues to say over the subsequent pages, which is to establish the larger timeline of when he decided not to run, but ultimately decided to run for president 2016 and 2020, to sort of explain that Biden may have not necessarily remembered the year, yes, when he was prompted on it, but certainly he, of course, it's a searing moment in his life, but also what Biden was attempting to do was convey to her the fuller context of why he was engaged in the kind of work that he was taking on when he left the vice presidency and why he was writing the book that he wrote, Promise Me, Dad, which, of course, gets into that entire timeline before and after Beau's death.